If anyone had warned Clara that one quiet weekend could disturb the careful balance of her peaceful life, she would have smiled politely and changed the subject. She believed she had outgrown surprises. At 38, her world felt steady and predictable. She lived alone in a small town where mornings began with birdsong and evenings ended with warm tea and soft music. Her work as a freelance editor kept her busy, but not overwhelmed. She liked it that way. She liked control. She liked knowing where her emotions belonged. What she did not know was that sometimes change does not knock loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a familiar car, carrying a familiar name, but in a completely unfamiliar form. The call came on Thursday evening. Clara was sitting at her desk, finishing a manuscript, when her phone lit up with Marianne's name. Marianne had been her closest friend for nearly 20 years. They had met in their early 20s, shared heartbreaks, job struggles, and endless late-night talks. Clara trusted her deeply. So when Marianne sounded slightly stressed on the phone, Clara listened carefully. "Daniel has an important university interview near your town," Marianne explained. "He needs somewhere quiet to stay just for the weekend. Hotels are expensive, and I don't want him alone before something so important. Would it be okay if he stayed with you?" Clara agreed without hesitation. She remembered Daniel as a thin, shy boy who used to hide behind his mother during visits. He had been polite, quiet, almost invisible. The idea of him staying over felt harmless. It felt like helping family. After all, she had watched him grow up from a distance. Could possibly be complicated about that? Friday arrived quickly. Clara spent the morning cleaning, though her house was already spotless. She changed the guest room sheets, placed fresh towels on the bed, and even bought ingredients to cook a proper dinner. She told herself she was just being kind, yet estranged. Restlessness followed her through the day. She blamed it on breaking routine. When the sound of a car engine echoed outside in the late afternoon, Clara glanced through the window. Marianne's car parked neatly along the curb. Clara wiped her hands on a towel and stepped outside with a welcoming smile. The passenger door opened. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Daniel stepped out slowly, stretching his arms after. The drive. He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, more composed. His face had sharpened with age, losing the softness of adolescence. His hair was slightly longer, falling carelessly across his forehead. But it was his eyes. That startled her. They were steady and observant, no longer shy. "Tell her he said warmly. His voice was deeper, too. Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Something small but noticeable. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply awareness. She pushed the feeling aside and hugged Marianne first. Laughing about the long drive and the busy roads, Daniel carried his bag into the house himself. He thanked her politely, complimented the cozy feeling of the living room, and spoke with calm confidence. Clara found herself studying him without meaning to. This was not the boy who once spilled juice on her carpet and apologized for 10 minutes straight. This was a grown man. Marianne stayed only a few minutes before rushing back, promising to return Sunday afternoon. When her car disappeared down the street, the house fell quiet. Clara suddenly became aware that she was alone with him. The silence felt different than usual. She quickly suggested tea. Daniel followed her into the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves to help without being asked. That simple gesture surprised her. He moved comfortably in the space, not awkward or unsure. They spoke about his studies, about the program he hoped to enter, about the city he dreamed of living in one day. His words carried ambition, but also uncertainty. He wanted independence, yet he feared disappointing his mother. Clara listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. She enjoyed meaningful conversation, and Daniel offered exactly that. There was depth in his answers. He spoke about feeling caught between expectations and his own desires. He admitted that he sometimes felt invisible at home, as if everyone still saw him as a child. I guess I just want to be seen for who I am now, he said quietly. The sentence lingered in the air. Clara looked at him more closely then. Truly looked at him. There was vulnerability beneath his confidence, a quiet hunger to prove himself. She understood that feeling well. She had spent years trying to prove she was strong, independent, unshakable. "You are not invisible," she said gently. "You've grown into someone thoughtful. That matters." Their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. Clara broke the gaze first. Dinner that evening felt surprisingly easy. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table near the window. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange shades, filling the room with warm light. Daniel complimented her cooking with sincerity, not politeness. He asked about her work, her hobbies, her life. Not in a casual way, but with genuine curiosity. It had been a long time since someone asked about her life like that. Most conversations she had were practical, brief, surface level. Okay, yes. But Daniel leaned forward when she spoke. He paid attention. He remembered details. When she mentioned a novel she loved, he asked why it moved her. When she described working alone for hours, he asked if she ever felt lonely. The question surprised her. Sometimes. She admitted before she could stop herself. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, as if storing the information. Carefully after dinner, they moved to the living room. A light rain began tapping against the windows. The sound created a calm atmosphere, almost intimate. Clara wrapped a light sweater around her shoulders and sat on the armchair, while Daniel chose the couch. They talked about music, about travel, about mistakes. He confessed he had once chosen a field of study only to please others, she admitted. She had once stayed in a relationship far longer than she should have. Afraid of starting over? There was no judgment between them, only honesty. At some point, Clara realized she was laughing freely. It had been months since laughter felt that natural. She noticed how Daniel watched her when she smiled, as if he appreciated the sound. That awareness unsettled her slightly. She stood up suddenly and offered to bring dessert, needing a moment. To collect herself in the kitchen, she leaned against the counter and inhaled deeply. What was happening? Nothing inappropriate, nothing wrong. And yet, her heartbeat felt faster than usual. She reminded herself firmly, he is your friend's son. This is temporary. This is harmless. When she returned with small bowls of fruit, Daniel's expression softened. You look thoughtful, she said. I was just thinking about how quickly time passes, she replied, choosing safe words. He smiled faintly. It does. Sometimes too quickly. They cleaned up together. Their movements in the kitchen were close but careful. Once their shoulders brushed lightly as they reached for the sink at the same time. The contact lasted barely a second. Still, it sent an unexpected warmth through her. Clara stepped back immediately, pretending to adjust something on the counter. Daniel didn't comment, but his silence felt aware. Later that night, she showed him the guest room. He thanked her again. His tone softer now. I'm really glad I came here, he said quietly. It feels peaceful. Clara forced a gentle smile. Focus on your interview tomorrow. That's what matters. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on her face for a brief moment before he closed the door. When Clara returned to her own bedroom, the house felt different. Not louder, not chaotic. It's just charged with something unspoken. She changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Why did his presence feel so noticeable? She told herself it was simply nostalgia. Watching a child grow into adulthood could surprise anyone. That was all, nothing deeper. But as she lay down and turned off the lamp, her mind replayed the evening's conversations. The way he listened, the way he spoke her name, the way his eyes held steady when she talked about loneliness. Sleep did not come easily. She shifted under the blanket, listening to the faint sound of rain outside. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear the soft creak of the guest room floorboards. As Daniel moved, Bowles felt smaller than usual. Clara turned onto her side and closed her eyes tightly. As if that could silence her thoughts, she had invited him for 2 nights. Just to die, yet already, something invisible had entered her carefully organized life. And deep inside, she sensed that by the time Sunday arrived, she would not be the same calm, unaffected woman she had been on Thursday evening. She just didn't know yet whether that change would break her balance or awaken something she had long tried to ignore. Clara woke to the soft light of Saturday morning spilling across her bedroom. She had barely slept, her mind restless with thoughts she refused to name. She reminded herself firmly that Daniel was her friend's son, nothing more. Boundaries were clear. And yet there was a tension in the house that felt alive, almost palpable. The rain from the night before had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. Clara dressed quickly, choosing something casual for the morning. She tried to shake off the nervous flutter she felt whenever she thought of him. He was in the kitchen already, making coffee and quietly humming a tune she faintly recognized from a song they had once shared in conversation years ago. "Good morning," she said lightly, trying to sound casual. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice carrying a calm confidence that made Clara's chest tighten. He had a presence now that was both comforting and unsettling. He handed her a cup of coffee without a word, the gesture simple yet deliberate. It felt intimate, though no one had asked for intimacy. She accepted it with a small smile, noticing how naturally their hands brushed. The touch was brief, innocent, yet it lingered in her mind longer than it should have. Breakfast was quiet at first. They spoke about the weather, the simple routines of the morning, and small-town news. Clara tried to keep the conversation light, but Daniel had a way of steering dialogue toward depth without even trying. He asked her questions that made her pause about her work, her goals, her childhood dreams, her regrets. She answered honestly, not hiding the small truths she usually reserved for her diary. He listened with genuine interest, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never judging. After breakfast, Daniel suggested helping in the garden. He said it casually, but Clara sensed the underlying purpose: to spend more time together, to interact in a natural, relaxed environment. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the organized rows of plants she had tended to meticulously, but agreed. Outside, the sun was bright but gentle, warming their backs as they moved through the garden. They worked in silence at first, but soon words began to flow naturally. Daniel spoke about feeling unsure of himself at university, about trying to live up to expectations, about discovering passions he had hidden from his parents. Clara listened, nodding and offering encouragement where appropriate. She shared small parts of herself as well, how she had faced disappointments in work, how she had struggled with feeling invisible despite her independence, and how sometimes, despite appearances, everyone needed reassurance. Their conversation flowed easily, and Clara noticed subtle shifts in her awareness. She became conscious of how his hand lingered near hers while planting seeds, how he laughed lightly at her small jokes, and how his eyes held steady, thoughtful, and kind. She felt a warmth she had not expected, a tug of curiosity, of fascination, of something unspoken that made her heart beat faster. By late morning, clouds began to gather in the sky again, hinting at another shower. They moved inside, brushing dirt from their clothes, still talking. Daniel picked up a small book from the shelf, flipping through pages of poems and quotes he remembered from a past conversation. He read a few aloud, his voice soft and deliberate. Clara felt her chest tighten in a way she had not felt in years. She reminded herself of her boundaries, but the warmth of shared vulnerability made restraint difficult. His voice, calm and rich, seemed to fill the room and linger in her mind long after the words faded. Lunch was light. They ate sandwiches and fresh fruit, still talking, still sharing. Daniel spoke about friendships he had lost or grown apart from, about trust he had struggled to maintain, about hope for the future. Clara listened, empathizing. She thought about her own friendships, the ones that had shaped her and the ones that had faded with time. They shared laughter freely, a rhythm that felt easy, natural, and profoundly comforting. Clara had not realized how much she had missed having someone so attuned to her thoughts. She noticed how he mirrored her expressions, how he reacted to her pauses, how the smallest details of her gestures seemed to matter to him. Later, the sky darkened and rain began to fall gently. The sound against the windows created a cocoon around them. Clara suggested tea, and they moved to the small sitting area, cups in hand. Settling near the window where they could watch raindrops slide down the glass, Daniel continued speaking of personal experiences, of moments where he had felt unsure, anxious, or alone. Clara shared her own stories, ones she had kept hidden even from close friends, about heartbreak, disappointment, and moments of doubt. There was no judgment, only understanding, not a quiet acknowledgement of shared human fragility. At some point, Daniel asked a question that made Clara pause. Do you ever feel lonely, even surrounded by people who care about you? She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal, then admitted. Sometimes. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. It's about not feeling truly understood. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze steady. I think I understand that. Felt the same way. There was a silence after that, filled with unspoken recognition. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was not a physical attraction, not yet. It was something subtler, something emotional, a connection that carried a weight neither of them fully acknowledged. 10. They continued talking, their hands brushed again. This time it lingered a fraction longer. Clara pulled back slightly, reminding herself of reality. He was her friend's son. There was a line that must not be crossed. But the warmth that traveled from that brief touch unsettled her. It was electric in a quiet, gentle way, the kind of spark that could grow if nurtured. It's the kind of spark that demanded awareness. The afternoon passed with more conversation, more quiet moments, more laughter. Daniel shared memories from his childhood, embarrassing moments, proud moments, small victories he had forgotten he had cherished. Clara laughed freely, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. She realized she had been holding herself tightly for years, protecting herself from disappointment and longing, from unspoken desires. Daniel's presence made her feel safe, yet aware of emotions she had not expected to confront at one point. They both reached for the same cup of tea. Their fingers touched lightly. Clara felt a shiver pass through her, a momentary thrill she immediately tried to suppress. Daniel seemed to sense the subtle tension but did not comment. The air between them hummed quietly, the room holding a delicate, unspoken energy. Dinner approached and Clara prepared a simple meal. Daniel helped with minor tasks, cutting vegetables, setting the table. Their conversation remained natural, flowing between mundane topics and intimate reflections. She found herself smiling often, feeling a combination of surprise and pleasure at how easy it was to be with him. The boundaries she had mentally enforced seemed fragile in comparison to the emotional closeness forming between them. After dinner, they settled in the living room. Rain pattered against the windows, creating a private world inside Clara's home. Daniel spoke softly about his ambitions, the struggles of growing up, and the sense of wanting to belong somewhere, truly. Clara found herself relating, sharing moments of her own where she had felt displaced or misunderstood. They sat close, yet careful. Aware of the invisible line of propriety, a sudden memory came to Clara. Daniel as a boy, shy, nervous, fumbling with his words. Now he was a young man, thoughtful, articulate, aware of his surroundings and of her presence. The contrast was stark. She realized she was seeing him in a way she had not anticipated, appreciating not just his growth, but his spirit, sensitivity, his kindness. Evening fell and Daniel moved to the guest room, thanking her again for the hospitality. Clara watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and a strange ache she did not want to name. The house was quiet again. She went to her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, reflecting on the day. The conversations, the laughter, the touches, the shared vulnerability, they all left her feeling both exhilarated and unsettled. She recognized the challenge clearly. Feelings were developing, but they were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. She was aware of them, and that awareness frightened her. This weekend was supposed to be simple, safe, temporary. It was now layered with unexpected emotional complexity. Her mind replayed the moments. Brushing hands, steady gazes, shared stories, quiet laughter. Each memory felt charged with meaning she could not fully acknowledge. She reminded herself that Daniel was not only her friend's son, but also a young man at a crossroads in his life. Any emotional misstep could cause unintended consequences. She told herself firmly that awareness did not require action. Boundaries could remain intact even as feelings surfaced. Yet she also understood that feelings do not always respect boundaries. They appear quietly, subtly, growing in influence even when uninvited. Clara knew that restraint would require conscious effort. She could not ignore the connection she felt, but she could choose integrity over impulse. The night deepened. Rain continued softly against the windows. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, recalling his smile, his thoughtful questions, his calm confidence, the way he had looked at her when she spoke. A flutter of emotions stirred in her chest, a mix of admiration, curiosity, longing, and fear. She did not allow herself to dwell too long, focusing instead on her breathing, reminding herself that tomorrow would bring clarity. Sunday morning arrived quietly, though Clara's heart felt anything but calm. She woke before the sun, the house still dim with soft light filtering through the curtains. She lay in bed for a while, thinking about Daniel, about the way he had lingered in her mind all night. She tried to dismiss the emotions stirring inside her, reminding herself firmly that he was her friend's son, that boundaries existed for a reason, that she had a responsibility to Marianne and to herself. Yet as she dressed and walked into the kitchen, she found herself longing for his presence in a way that both startled and unnerved her. Daniel was already there, standing near the counter with a cup of coffee, looking out the window at the quiet. "Morning," he turned slightly as she entered, his expression calm but open. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They settled into the small routine of breakfast, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Clara tried to focus on making the meal, but her mind drifted, catching glimpses of him as he moved, noting the way his hair fell slightly into his eyes, the curve of his smile, the gentle tone he used when he asked questions. She reminded herself that noticing him was harmless. Thinking about him, however, carried an energy she could not ignore. As they ate, Daniel spoke casually about the interview he would face later in the day, about the anticipation and nerves he felt. Clara listened, offering encouragement, trying to focus on the practical. "You'll do well," she said genuinely. "You've prepared, and that's what matters." He nodded, but then looked at her differently. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that suggested recognition. Recognition of a connection neither of them fully understood, but both felt. He stayed silent for a moment, then continued speaking. "Spending time here this weekend, it's been different," he admitted. His voice was calm, yet there was a softness that made her stomach tighten. Clara paused. Different. That one word carried weight. It acknowledged what she was feeling without naming it. She felt exposed, even though no one had crossed any lines. It was only acknowledgement of the emotional intimacy they had shared, of laughter, conversation, and small touches that lingered in the memory of her skin. "I know what you mean," she said carefully, choosing her words with deliberate thought. "It's been peaceful in a way I didn't expect." Daniel smiled faintly. "I wasn't expecting that either," he admitted. "I didn't think a weekend stay could feel this significant." Clara kept her gaze fixed on the table, stirring her tea slowly. The warmth from the cup contrasted sharply with the flutter of emotion in her chest. She reminded herself again. Feelings were natural, awareness was human, but actions mattered, respect mattered, integrity mattered. She could feel the pull of attraction, the gentle curiosity, the allure of connection, but she knew the right choice was restraint. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk before Marianne arrived. The town streets were quiet, the sunlight filtered through clouds, and the air smelled faintly of rain. They walked side by side, their steps naturally aligned. Clara felt her pulse quicken when their shoulders brushed lightly. Daniel did not comment, but she felt him notice, and somehow that made it feel even more delicate, more intimate. Without words, they walked in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought, each aware of the presence of the other. Daniel spoke first, his tone reflective. "Sometimes we meet people at the wrong time," he said gently. "People who could mean more to us than we expect, but life isn't ready for it yet." Clara's heart skipped. He had expressed exactly what she had felt but hadn't dared to voice. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth without allowing herself to dwell on it. "Timing matters," she said softly. "And knowing when to step back is just as important as knowing when to move forward." They continued walking, speaking carefully about everyday things, school, work, hobbies, but beneath the surface, each word was layered with meaning. Daniel's questions carried attention, his observations carried care. And Clara found herself responding with honesty that was unusual even for her. She realized that he wasn't asking to manipulate or to explore boundaries. He was connecting, seeking understanding, seeking the clarity of human connection. And she respected that. By late morning, they returned home. The house felt quieter now, anticipatory, as if aware that the weekend was reaching its conclusion. Clara found herself tidying up quickly, her hands moving faster than usual, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't fully understand. Daniel offered to help, moving naturally around the kitchen and living room. The ease of his presence was comforting, yet the emotional undercurrent was undeniable. Every glance, every casual gesture, every shared laugh seemed charged with meaning they both recognized but refused to name. Lunch was quiet. They ate sandwiches and fruit, discussing the interview once more. Daniel's questions now had a reflective tone, as if he were aware that the weekend's end was near. Clara responded thoughtfully, encouraging him, offering advice, but also savoring the moments of quiet intimacy that were theirs alone. She felt a bittersweet awareness. Soon, this weekend would end, and with it, the closeness they had shared would be disrupted. After lunch, Clara suggested they sit in the living room. For a few moments, the rain had begun again, gentle against the windows. Daniel picked up a small book from the shelf, a collection of reflections and short stories, and read a passage aloud. Clara listened, captivated not just by the words but by the care in his voice. She realized, with some discomfort, that she had been drawn to his presence more than she had intended. The connection they shared was real, subtle, and profoundly affecting. They talked for a long while, exploring thoughts and experiences from childhood, school, and personal growth. Daniel spoke of the pressures he had felt from family expectations, the loneliness of trying to define himself, and the challenges of knowing who he truly was. Clara responded, sharing her own stories with care, reflecting on moments of doubt, loss, and resilience. Their conversation was steady, grounded, and yet carried an emotional weight that neither ignored nor diminished as afternoon approached. The sense of closure became more pressing. Marianne would arrive soon, and the weekend would conclude. Clara felt a tension she hadn't anticipated, a mix of relief, longing, and apprehension. She understood clearly now that the weekend had brought more than just company. It had brought reflection, awareness, and the awakening of emotions she hadn't expected to confront. Daniel spoke quietly, almost reluctantly, I guess. I'll miss this when I leave." Clara's chest tightened. She nodded. "We'll always have the memories," she said softly. "And you'll carry the lessons in kindness forward." They both knew there was more to the words than they admitted. There was acknowledgement of the bond they had formed, of feelings they had carefully kept in check. But they also knew that respect and integrity required boundaries. Attraction could exist without action. Longing could exist without crossing lines. The strongest choice was often restraint. And both were acutely aware of that truth. When Marianne arrived, the farewell was polite, calm, and thoughtful. Clara hugged Daniel, careful to maintain propriety, but unable to hide the subtle warmth. In her gesture, his eyes held a gentle recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the emotional journey they had shared. There were no words spoken about the depth of the connection. And yet it was understood. As they drove away, Clara stood in the quiet house, the rooms suddenly seeming emptier than before. She walked slowly from room to room, touching familiar objects, noticing small details, and reflecting on the intensity of the weekend. It had begun simply as a kind gesture for a friend, yet it had grown into a deeply emotional experience. She recognized the challenge she had faced. Temptation had not been loud or reckless, but subtle, quiet, and profoundly human, Clara thought. About Daniel's words, meeting people at the wrong time, the significance of connection, the need to respect boundaries. She understood now that the weekend had not been about crossing limits, but about testing her awareness, strength, and ability to navigate complex emotions. She felt gratitude for the moments of laughter, for the shared vulnerability, for the honesty that had made her feel alive. She sat by the window watching the rain. There was no regret, no shame, no sense of failure. Instead, there was clarity. The weekend had reminded her that emotional intimacy could exist without crossing lines. That connection could be meaningful even when temporary. That longing could coexist with integrity. She realized that some experiences are not about indulgence, but about understanding oneself, understanding others, and understanding the boundaries that preserve both trust and respect. As evening approached, Clara prepared her home for the week ahead. The quiet restored itself slowly, the house resuming its usual rhythm. She found herself smiling softly at the memory of Daniel, his presence, his words, his gentle awareness of her. She understood that life often presents moments of unexpected emotion, of quiet revelation, and that navigating them with grace requires courage. Weeks later, Daniel sent a brief message. "Thank you for reminding me what kindness and strength look like.